morning and welcome to InterActions LA, the UCLA Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies annual event. I'm Madeline Brosen and I serve as the Lewis Center Deputy Director. A quick look at our agenda today, and I want to start with a little bit about the Lewis Center. So at the Lewis Center, we focus on policy issues around housing affordability, access to opportunity and transportation equity, and jobs in the regional economy. And one of the purposes of this event is to bring together topics that cut across our research areas and bring promising solutions to our audience. So we're really excited to have this topic today. After my introduction, we're going to hear from our keynote speaker, followed by 3 presentations at 10 o'clock. And then Lewis Center Director Evelyn Blumenberg will come at the end, and we're going to conclude at 11:45. If you know someone that should be joining us that is not here today, you can register and join the Zoom webinar at any time. We'll also have this event recording on our YouTube channel afterwards, and we'll also post our slides to the website. We're so fortunate to be joined by an amazing lineup of women working on programs to get cash to people in need. From Compton, we have Nika Soon-Shong. From Vancouver, we have Heather Hay and Alice Hopkins. From San Francisco, we have Deb Kasarik, Breezy Powell, and Latrice Love Goodlet. And from Jackson, Mississippi, we have Sarah Strip. Next slide, please. Lisa Varon from BAE Economics, who worked on the program in Santa Monica, will be our moderator for the panel. With that introduction and background, I want to take a moment at the outset of the event to ground us in a couple of key objectives and framing on this topic. So first of all, I want to say the intent of hosting an event on universal basic income and cash transfer is not to convince you in the audience of the need and value of cash. What we know is that cash works. So what we're going to hear from today are great pilot programs, but I'd argue that the pilot part is figuring out how to structure the programs, the in-depth mechanics of the task of hand, not a proof of concept. In the United States, there are a number of programs where cash assistance and cash transfers already happen. Temporary assistance to needy families, earned income tax credit, food stamps, housing choice voucher programs. There are a myriad of ways in which the federal government provides people the resources to afford them their basic needs and maintain stability in their lives. But what we also know is that these existing programs do not reach enough people in need, leaving many people who could benefit behind. Additionally, we know that for recipients, the administrative burden of receiving this assistance is really high, and that can create a time poverty just to get cash in hand. So what these pilots are demonstrating are key aspects of how a federal guarantee and more universal cash payments can work, and use these pilots as a way to advance federal policy. Part of these pilots we'll hear from today are also going to try to push back explicitly against racist stereotypes of cash assistance and the racism directed at those who receive help, especially for Black women. But second, in this past year, we've seen how critical universal aid has been to be keeping people and the country afloat during the stunning economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen this in terms of direct stimulus checks to households under certain income thresholds, and in the form of expanded unemployment benefits to people who are out of work. This cash has done real good for people. And excitingly, here in the city of Los Angeles, there's going to be a government pilot. And even while this will extend to 2,000 people in the city, we know that the need is much larger. So drawing on work from Lewis Center colleagues on renter distress in Los Angeles during the pandemic, they highlight how that while people's rent didn't change, what did was their ability to pay. And their recommended solution was to get cash into the hands of needy renters as fast and easy as possible. Because through all of this, we know that people are the best arbitrators to understand how to use cash to get what they need to live quality lives. If you're interested in learning more about this work, there's a link that just got put in the chat. So what we're going to hear about today is that financial stress is not only difficult on people's daily lives, but on their health as well. So drawing from this work, people who were late on rent payments during the pandemic were found to be highly correlated with depression and anxiety, and that we know that there's a lot more that really needs to be done to help people. So what we're going to do today is hear about this topic from people who know a lot more than me. And so I'm going to stop there with background and introduce our keynote speaker, Nika Soon-Chong of the Compton Pledge. Nika is Executive Director for the Fund for Guaranteed Income and has led international and local initiatives to support cash transfers. She is a board member of One Fair Wage and the Compton Community Development Corporation. After establishing the World Bank's strategy for managing partnerships with global technology companies, she leads a World Bank Innovation Challenge to develop a social insurance platform for the informal sector workers in West Africa. In addition to all of the great work she's doing in Los Angeles and internationally, Nika is also a doctoral candidate at Oxford University's Department of International Development. Thank you all for joining us so much today, and I want to hand over the floor to our keynote speaker.
Thank you so much for having me. Let me share my slides quickly. My name is Nika Soon-Chong. I direct the Fund for Guaranteed Income, which is a 501c3 launched this summer with the goal of facilitating pilots in multiple cities, beginning with efforts to raise funds for and launch the Compton Pledge. I'm going to talk about guaranteed income from theory to practice. The problem today is that there's extreme wealth inequality now and historically. The wealthiest 1% in America own as much wealth as the bottom 99%. And the pandemic is threatening the biggest rise in inequality since actual records began. The median wealth of white households is 4 times that of Hispanic and Black households. So what does that have to do with welfare? 65% of Black Americans were ineligible for Social Security when it began, legally excluded from the New Deal and GI Bill, and COVID relief programs such as the CARES Act excluded undocumented workers, formerly incarcerated people, and other non-tax filers. Those relatively small payments have been one-time and/or temporary. And as you can say, sometimes the fastest way is out the door. Guaranteed income is recurring, unconditional, direct cash transfers with no constraints on how the money is spent. It's meant to be over a sustained period of time and provided as a supplement, not a replacement of existing welfare programs. This is a policy that has been championed by racial justice leaders throughout time. It is point 2 on the Black Panthers' 10-point program. Martin Luther King championed it as a part of the Poor People's Campaign. And today, the Movement for Black Lives includes universal basic income on its policy platform, stating that no other social or economic policy solution would be at sufficient scale to eradicate the profound and systemic economic inequalities. So between the global protests calling for the reinvestment in Black communities and the need to deliver emergency cash-based COVID relief, the case for guaranteed income, at least to us, seems like it's at an unprecedented peak. There's been direct cash federal legislation and a collection of now 50 mayors in an organization called Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, who have committed to advocating for this policy and implementing pilots. And what I find in this map over here is all of the mayors so far who have committed to this organization. What I find really amazing is that it's not just cities and elected officials, but national movements that are organizing people who are excluded from welfare programs. Movements such as A New Way of Life Reentry Project, which has delivered direct cash to over 7,000 individuals who were recently released from incarceration. One Fair Wage, which organizes tipped and service industry workers and started the Emergency Fund. The National Domestic Workers Alliance, which started the Corona Care Fund for domestic workers, and the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And what I find about this This initiative in particular is that it speaks to the gaps in today's social safety net and the gaps that we need to crack and fill with guaranteed income. This is not a new idea. What we see here is that you don't have to look at this graph. I know it's kind of hectic, but the idea of unconditional cash has been proliferated, but the international community has had a huge role to play. From the late 1990s to the early 2000s, there have been programs such as Bolsa Familia in Brazil, Oportunidades in Mexico. Those are conditional cash transfers, which require, for example, school attendance. And programs that just gave money to the poor have changed the idea that people would buy alcohol, tobacco, or not work if they were given cash. A striking fact is that before the pandemic, 77% of countries in the world had unconditional cash transfer programs. And we've empirically studied the impact of cash. But existing research to date has not tested the impact of household outcomes from a substantial and unconditional income support policy in a developed country, which is why I think programs like the ones we'll hear about today are so important. Here are some of the parameters that we can use to understand the different forms that guaranteed income has taken. We can all agree that it's unconditional, but there are questions around what is sufficient, what is universal, does this count residents or is it only for citizens? Should it be targeted to low-income individuals or for all individuals within society? These are questions that I think are really important to answer moving forwards at the borders of the policy. My favorite quote from Toni Morrison, "I stood at the border, stood at the edges, and claimed it as central." Now I'm going to transition from talking about guaranteed income and to talking about the work that we're doing in Compton, the Compton Pledge. The Compton Pledge is a 2-year guaranteed income initiative to provide to 800 households between $300 and $600 monthly. For the average family of color in the pilot, this transfer will eliminate 70% of the racial wealth gap. We aim to test more inclusive mechanisms for cash transfer delivery. There's no social security number or ITIN required to receive our prepaid debit cards. And we want to explore those unanswered questions to policy implementation. Why Compton? In the second half of the 20th century, along with much of LA's urban core, Compton experienced white flight, the erosion of its tax base, and it's a city where many of the social inequities that we're dealing with as a country intersect. 30% of Compton's 100,000 residents are Black, 68% are Latino, many of which are underpaid, ineligible for government assistance, or unemployed. Unemployment has tripled since the onset of the pandemic. 1 in 5 Comptonites live in poverty, which is double the nationwide average. And current Mayor Asia Brown's advocacy for guaranteed income is a part of a set of bold anti-poverty policies that she's pursued over her 2 terms as mayor. So this summer, alongside activists, she's taken a stand linking the public health crisis of COVID-19 to the pervasive PTSD following decades of police violence and brutality. Compton is in many ways the cultural capital of the US, of California, but it hasn't been funded as such. It has a $172 million budget, 22 million of which is siphoned to pay for the sheriff's department. And we want Compton to be leading the United States. This is the richest state in the world. And we feel that this kind of example of wealth disparities is unacceptable. We met this moment of urgency with urgency on our own. So we started working on the pilot in September of 2020. We started dispersing the cash in December. September, we organized a community advisory council, which constitutes 20 members, heads of local nonprofits, pastors, residents, the president of Compton College, educators, principals from the Unified School District. We knew that to be successful, we weren't the experts in terms of how to roll out a program in Compton, they were. And they were the first people to beta test and help us develop a custom Compton Pledge payments portal. They changed the language based on the anticipated needs of their members. We also built an admin portal, knowing that for program administrators, there needs to be a really easy to use tool. We launched the program on MLK Day weekend, and between then and April 6th, we've enrolled all 800 participants. Here's some quick highlights of our program. We have enrolled 800 families, and that means that there are 1,770 beneficiaries if you include families' children. We've dispersed $1 million out of the total $9.2 million that we will disperse over the 2 years of this pilot. We've made 2,200 payments with only 7 payment errors if somebody fills out their wrong bank information. And we've had 5,000 customer service tickets filled, which means people reaching out to us on our portal's chat box or hotline. And our average waiting time is 90 seconds. We have a 3-person team, including myself, and I know personally that this is a really important part of the program, to have that 90-second waiting time to build trust. When somebody has a question, they get on the phone and they know they're speaking to Nika, who they spoke to last time, and I can help them find their credit card or their debit card. This chart is an overview of our independent evaluation led by the Jane Family Institute. Our research design is a 2-year randomized controlled trial to assess the effect of an unconditional income support to low-income residents of a major US city. We're looking at outcomes in terms of work hours, time use, spending, savings, healthcare, child education. And households are eligible if they are located in Compton, have at least 1 member between the ages of 25 to 54, and are below 200% of the federal poverty threshold. We wanted to create a sample of 800 households who are representative of the city in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of percentage of undocumented, in terms of percentage of formerly incarcerated. Because from this, we can draw insights around what it would look like to scale this policy at a city level. So half of the participants will receive money twice a month, similar to a paycheck stimulus. The other half of the recipients will receive the transfers once every quarter for 2 years. And this is to understand the ideal timing of payments. We're looking really unapologetically at implementation. So how did we implement this? How does someone sign up? There is no application process. We identified eligible recipients through a combination of city and CBO data. And the first touch point with residents was an email and SMS saying, "Welcome to the Compton Pledge. Create your payments profile on our portal and start receiving money." And perhaps unsurprisingly, when you email people offering free money, it really looks like a scam. So everything from the language of that email, the text you see there, what logos were on the email, that was really wordsmithed by our Community Advisory Council, which helped launch a social media campaign during enrollment and vouched for the program when our residents inevitably asked them about it. Is this real? And through this process, in the end, we had a 99% sign-up rate from people who were sent the email cold, which is something that I'm personally really proud of. And I think it speaks to the importance of having community engagement on everything from the broader vision of a program to the minute practical details. When you click the link from that text, then you see this payments portal where participants choose between Venmo, PayPal, direct deposit, or a custom prepaid debit card, which we will either mail directly to their homes, or we can mail it for safe in-person pickup at a local nonprofit. Participants through this portal can understand when their next payment is, see their previous payments, and also change their payment method at any time. Programming. This is also where we ensure that we fill out those customer service tickets to build trust. And through the portal, we provide access to services such as one-on-one financial coaching and other community-based nonprofit services. In addition to our payments portal and our programming, I'm excited about our political coalition. The Compton People's Pledge, it's a take on the Giving Pledge. It's about giving people power through guaranteed income as a human right, as opposed to giving as charity. The political coalition we've built consists of national organizations and their leaders who have taken the pledge. And we passed the Compton Pledge as a local resolution of the Breathe Act in collaboration with Black Lives Matter and the leaders who wrote that legislation. And that's something that we hear from participants every day, that this has given them the room to breathe. As Georgia says, it made me able to breathe again, to try not just to think about what to do during the pandemic, but after the pandemic. Here are some of the national leaders who have supported the Compton Pledge: Gina Clayton, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, Sarah Jayaraman, Asia Brown. Maybe I'll end with a quote from Alicia Garza that the Compton Pledge looks at the relationship between and amongst systems. It is building the infrastructure that communities need to be safe, to be whole, to be dignified. So this is not just about the cash itself, it's about reimagining investment in communities. And our goal at Fund for Guaranteed Income, we have no plans to slow down. We want this to work. We know this will work. This is a pilot, but we want to lift up others like the National Council. Where California goes, so goes the nation. And we think where Compton goes, so goes the nation. So we hope to expand our approach, our platform, and our political coalition. I want to thank you so much for having me, and I'll pass it back to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Nika. That was a great setup in terms of why we need this, how this isn't new, and really the promise of doing this in service to local communities. So I want to go ahead and introduce our moderator for who's going to talk about these other programs. So Lisa Varon, as I mentioned, is the Vice President of BAE Economics, and she worked on the program in the city of Santa Monica previously. Lisa, I want to hand it over to you to introduce the rest of our speakers.
Terrific, thank you. So I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel today and to be speaking with this group of leaders in the guaranteed income arena. What you'll see today is a wide range of approaches and experiences with running guaranteed income programs. In my own experience in 2017 in the city of Santa Monica, we began to implement the Preserving Our Diversity program, which served seniors who are at risk of losing their housing in our community. Today's speakers run programs that include serving people experiencing homelessness as well as single mothers. And the format is that I'm going to introduce the group as a whole and their background, and then each program is going to describe their program and what they do for about 15 minutes. And then we have a couple of questions that we will roundtable and discuss together. Alice Hopkins is the program manager at Foundations for Social Change, and she's passionate about using qualitative research to tell bold and compelling stories about complex social issues. She's worked on a range of roles in the nonprofit sector in the UK and internationally, and has a master's degree in social and cultural anthropology from University College London. She's worked in a variety of social research, qualitative research, and as a project manager and researcher, she helped deliver bold and honest insights to public sector organizations on topics including long-term healthcare conditions, physical impairments, gambling, and homelessness. Since joining the foundation, she's played a key role in overseeing project operations and data collection, and is developing new ways to bring insight from qualitative data to understanding impact. Heather Hay is the COO of Foundations for Social Change. She's a healthcare executive with extensive senior leadership and experience across healthcare systems in Canada, particularly with innovative program planning, evaluation, and development. She has a passion for working with marginalized client populations and adapting systems to meet their needs. Heather's a recipient of the National Deloitte Public Service Award and twice awarded Premier's Public Service Award for Innovation and Collaboration. Heather holds a master's in Science of Applied Science from McGill University in Montreal, Quebec, and a master's in leadership from Royal Roads University, British Columbia. Sarah Strip is the program manager for Springboard to Opportunities. She's an experienced strategist and program coordinator and has worked for the past 8 years in the nonprofit sector, taking on a variety of roles from providing direct services to coordinating and building local and national partnerships. She's been at Springboard to Opportunities since beginning in 2016 and currently manages organization-wide initiatives and programs such as the Magnolia Mothers Trust. Breezy Powell is a soft-hearted yet strong-minded leader, visionary, teacher, and more. She's a certified massage therapist, doula, and dance instructor based in the Bay Area. She's currently the administrative assistant at Expecting Justice, a Black-led collaborative mobilizing leaders from across San Francisco to take action for healthy Black and Pacific Islander births. The Abundant Birth Project is where she works, and that is part of her work with the UC San Francisco, California Preterm Birth Initiative. Deborah Krasik is an assistant professor in the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Sciences, and a researcher with the California Preterm Birth Initiative at UCSF. Her work investigates how structural contexts shape prenatal health and how to target policy solutions to improve health equity. She serves as the co-PI of the evaluation of a novel of this guaranteed pilot program for Black and Pacific Islander birthing people in San Francisco called the Abundant Birth Project. And lastly, last but not least, we have Latrice Love Goodlet. She's a facilitator, certified mediator, anti-racism, pro-Black equity focused consultant, musician, and poet, mother, and award-winning public speaker. Latrice has intimate knowledge of preterm birth, having been born at 28 weeks and having her own preterm scare as a first-time mother, navigating racism with each pregnancy, and knowing firsthand the difference in culturally competent care and what it can make. Latrice cherishes community and values that we each have an opportunity daily to honor our ancestors and practice Kumbh. Latrice is a graduate of Sonoma State University and has experience in the private sector, local and federal government, healthcare, and nonprofit sector. Okay, so I'm going to start first with Sarah Stripp, and she is going to share her screen and present on her program. Thank you, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. Let me pull up my slides for y'all. All right, perfect. Yeah, thank you again, Lisa, for that great introduction. So my name is Sarah Stripp, and I am the program manager for the Magnolia Mothers Trust, which is a guaranteed income program in Jackson, Mississippi. And at this point, the longest guaranteed income program running in the country. So we're really excited to get to share a little bit more about not only what our program looks like right now, but also the results that we've been seeing since 2018. It was really great to hear some of the things coming out of the Compton group this morning, because I think every time we're with other folks in guaranteed income spaces, we hear the same stories, and we're really excited to get to share some of ours. So there we go. So starting with our program, we always like to start with the origin and how this came about and what we know. So we know clearly that a minimum wage at this point does not provide the income to support a family. Our current welfare system uses really punitive measures that often discourage family from seeking higher wages or more employment. And the process of getting these benefits is often stressful, dehumanizing, and time consuming. And we know all of this because we talked to our families and they told us. So our organization, Springboard to Opportunities, is really intentional about being what we call radically resident driven. So that means everything that we get and hear comes from our residents themselves. Any sort of program or service that we're offered is from their voices and from the community. So we would sit down with residents every year and have these focus groups where we talk about, like, what programs do you want to see? What can we do to help you reach your goals? What can that look like? And again, what we would hear from them is cash, right? Like, I don't have a voucher to cover diapers for my kids. I don't have a voucher to help me with school uniforms or to put gas in my car or whatever those things are. We need freedom, and we need this cash, and we need people to trust us to know that we know how to take care of our families. And so we took that and wanted to figure out, what does that look like? So what does that look like to make a program that gives families cash? And so that's kind of how guaranteed income got started. It was really from our families and their voices and us believing them when they told us what they needed. So in response to that and those groups, we created what's called the Magnolia Mothers Trust. So the Magnolia Mothers Trust for us is reimagining what support can look like for low-income families, and particularly low-income families headed by Black mothers. We wanted to not only provide those assets that are necessary for families to exit poverty, but also show that first and foremost, we trust our families to use the resources in the best way that they see fit and to be the authors of their own lives. So everything again about this program came directly from our moms and was designed by them. As we started to enter into the space of guaranteed income and thinking about that, we pulled together groups of our moms to ask them questions like what would a guaranteed income pilot look like? I don't even know if we were using that language at that point, but like how much do you need each month? How long do you want this program to last? What is it that you are telling us that you need rather than us deciding for you what it is that you need in this space? So these are things that we heard. We heard they wanted a 12-month program. We heard that what they thought made the most sense was to think about $1,000 as that stipend. And all of that, again, came from our moms. So our program right now is in its third iteration. So our very first pilot ran in 2018 with 20 moms. A lot of that story is documented in the documentary that I saw someone sharing in the chat. So thank you very much. If you want to check out the Inherent Good documentary, that's a great place to get some stories from the early families who were a part of this. We ran a second cohort that started in March of 2020, literally days before the state of Mississippi went into lockdown, for 110 moms last year. And then we just started this past April, another cohort starting with about 100 low-income Black mothers who will be on this program for the next year. So everyone in this program receives this $1,000 of no strings attached monthly cash. And along with that, we are also offering families a seeded children's savings account for each child of the participant. And that's really intentional for us too, to make sure this program is too generational and thinking about long-term impacts for kids as well as for the moms. And the program lasts for 12 months. So that's 12 months of not only receiving this cash, but also spending time doing community building and helping connect our moms to social capital, whether that's employers in the area, or helping them go back to school, or whatever it is that they have identified as their goal. That's really intentional for us too, because we really believe these programs should always be cash plus. It's not just kind of like give folks cash and let everybody hang out, but like, how do we really spend some time helping people think about their dreams and think about their goals? For so many of these moms, they've never been asked before, like, what do they want? Or what do they want to do? So many people have spent their lives in survival mode and feeling really disconnected from the systems that they're a part of, that we really want to spend some time working with families to help them identify what those goals are and be able to get there. So that's a little bit more about the background from our program. We are, as I said, we just started this third cohort and we are just about to release the data from our second cohort. I think this will be all public and the full report will be out on Monday. So if you are interested in seeing that full report, please go ahead and subscribe to our newsletter because it will be in your inbox Monday morning. But just as kind of a preview of some of the things that we're really excited about and that we've seen happen with this second cohort. So we saw moms increase their ability to pay bills on time from 27% to 83%. Without support from other family or friends or predatory lending institutions that often are the first line of defense for our moms. This is like a really significant statistic for us, not only because of the huge ability or huge like gain in ability for moms to pay the bills, but just like looking at that 27% at the beginning when folks entered into this program. And this was before COVID had shut things down, before people lost work and jobs. But we were seeing 27% of people being able to pay their bills without emergency lending institutions. And if that's like not enough to tell us that our system is really broken, I don't know what else is. So we were really excited to be able to see that pop up. Also, we saw moms be able to increase their savings for emergencies. So before the pandemic or before the cohort started, only 40% of mothers had anything saved for emergencies. By the end of this program, 88% reported having something saved for emergencies. And we really saw that across the board in a lot of different things. Not only were folks able to create savings accounts, but we saw moms purchasing life insurance and health insurance, really being able to kind of set up themselves and their families for the future and make sure that everyone had what they were need to be taken care of and feel economically secure for one of the first times, which was really important. And we were really grateful to get to see. We also saw an increase in people being able to have enough food. Again, just like a sort of very basic thing that I think a lot of us don't think about. But, you know, at the start, 64% saying that they didn't have enough food each month, moving up to 81%. We saw even higher numbers with folks saying that they had enough food for every person in their household. What we saw a lot in the qualitative data was that oftentimes moms would skip meals so that their kids could eat. So being able to see not only that there was enough food in the household, but also that moms and kids had the ability to eat each meal, which is a pretty basic human right. But we were really grateful to watch that happen as well. We also saw increases in moms being able to prepare food at home and being able to prepare different styles of meals. So again, just like, and with the increasing cost of food during COVID, we knew that this was a really important piece and a place that moms often prioritized. So again, just kind of some highlights from some of the qualitative pieces that we saw too. Throughout our evaluation, moms constantly emphasized the importance of their children's education. And the additional funds that they received really allowed them the opportunity to support their children in virtual learning. So here in the city of Jackson, virtual learning pretty much took place from the start of the pandemic until about March of this year was finally when they started moving into some hybrid opportunities. So really our families were forced to make the choice of like quitting their job or leaving their kids at home, hoping that they would be able to stay enrolled in school and hoping that they'd be able to log into these into classes and even be able to afford the technology to make that happen. But again, we saw not only a steady space, but we actually saw an increase in moms who reported all their kids being enrolled in school by the end of this. And we know based on conversations and stories that so much of that was because moms were able to choose flexible jobs, choose different hours, be a little bit more picky about like what kind of work they were going to do so that they didn't just have to dump their kids at home or try to find someone who could take care of them, but actually really get to be there and support their kids in virtual learning or be able to hire a tutor or someone else who could be there to care for them. We also saw increases in moms who had health insurance coverage and were able to easily consult a doctor due to illness, which again was huge for us. The state of Mississippi has not expanded Medicaid at this point still, and being able to get on Medicaid, particularly as an adult in the state of Mississippi, is incredibly difficult. So for moms to be able to have health insurance coverage, oftentimes for the first time in their adult life, and really be able to have that security in the midst of a global pandemic, to know that they had that care was really important as well. We also saw significant increases in moms who were able to have the transportation that they needed. So again, there's not a lot of public transportation available in Jackson. So having a car is pretty much an essential way to get to work or to be able to make choices about where you want to go to the grocery store or where you're going to go to school or something like that. So for moms to always be able to have gas in their car when they're needed, to have car insurance, even increases in moms owning vehicles was a really great piece that we saw come out of this as well. So these are a couple quotes from some of our moms who were a part of this second cohort, just talking about the opportunity to feel whole as a mother for the first time, and knowing that someone wasn't forced to take anything just to be able to make it. Again, I just think these are really about kind of the life-changing opportunity that has come for so many of our moms. Ultimately, our goal in this program is not just to provide money for our moms, but to really start changing the narrative around Black mothers and around the assumptions that we make around particularly Black mothers who are in poverty. I think so often our assumptions are based on these cultural myths and narratives that we've been told again and again. But we want to really emphasize just the humanity of the people that we're working with. And we're kind of, in some ways, I think like Madeline said at the very beginning of this presentation, like we're not really interested at this point in proving that cash works, but in really showing people the power that this can have to change the story that we're telling people about moms and telling people about families who live in poverty and what that can mean. So for us, this program really stands in direct contrast to that stigmatized experience of receiving benefits through traditional welfare policies. Oftentimes, we have other stories from moms who talk about they feel just so disconnected from civic and political engagement, because they know that the people in charge don't expect them to vote and don't expect them to care and don't expect them to show up. And those myths have guided our social welfare policies. They've guided the way that folks interact with the system and feel discouraged and disheartened by it. And for us, we think it's time that the actual stories and wisdom of the women who are affected by these policies get to be put on center stage. And we want to change that narrative by what we call changing the narrator. And making sure that it is the voices of our moms that are front and center, and the voices of people who are most affected by these policies, who are the ones who get to talk about them and get to say what needs to happen. This is why it was so important for us to make sure that this program was grounded in the voices of our moms, and it's what we want to see happen moving forward. So we're really excited about a partnership that I'd encourage you all to check out. This is our partnership with Ms. Magazine right now, where every other week they are putting out an op-ed story written directly by one of our moms who's in the program. Some of that might be about their experience with guaranteed income, but other times it's honestly, just them being able to be themselves and tell their story, to kind of take out this myth that we have around poor Black women, and particularly poor Black mothers, and say, like, what does it look like to give someone an opportunity to hear their full story, to hear their full humanity. So we've already got a couple of them out. I'd encourage you to check them out and continue to follow along with that series, just to be able to hear the real stories of the women that we're working with on a regular basis. And then I'm going to hand it off to Heather and Alice.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and just thank you for everyone who's keyed in to listen today. I'm just going to go over and share my slides. Okay, so I'm Alice, and I'm the Programme Manager at Foundations for Social Change, and I'm joined today also by my colleague Heather Hay, who is going to join in later in the presentation. So Foundations for Social Change is a Vancouver-based charity. We're quite new. We only launched last year in October, and our first main initiative is the New Leaf Project, which is the first unconditional cash transfer project with a population of people experiencing homelessness. So we launched the New Leaf project in 2018, and it basically involved giving 50 people recently experiencing homelessness in Metro Vancouver a unconditional cash transfer of 7,500 Canadian dollars. And so that's where there's a slight difference between the guaranteed basic income model. This was basically just a lump sum unconditional cash transfer, and the amount was benchmarked basically against the 2016 income assistance rate in the province of British Columbia. So the three kind of main components of the New Leaf project was a kind of workshop session. We also offered coaching to some participants, and then we had the main financial support piece, which was the unconditional cash transfer. So we worked in partnership with the University of British Columbia. We're still working in partnership with them. And this basically allowed us to carry out the project as a randomized control trial. So we had basically 4 groups. And we had the kind of those 3 different supports split across the 4 groups. So the first 2 groups were our cash groups, and then we had groups 3 and 4, which either just had the workshop and the coaching or no supports. We also, though, had some additional resources, which we made sure that all participants taking part had the option to receive. So we paid honorarium every time that we met up with participants to do surveys. We provided a printed resource booklet, which was updated kind of seasonally, just to give phone numbers and kind of contacts for other supports in the community. We also provided replacement ID, which was a really key thing in the kind of process of enrolling people in the program. We found that ID was a huge barrier for people in terms of getting a bank account and joining into the program. We also provided used smartphones to people that needed them. And then we partnered with a local credit union, Van City, which was another really essential partnership in the kind of practical rollout of the program. So this was just really important because through our partnership, we were able to give people access to a free checking account, so people weren't susceptible to high banking fees. And we were able to also make sure that they could open their bank account just with one piece of ID and then a letter from Foundations from the New Leaf project, instead of the usual, which I think is 2 forms of ID. So just removing some of the barriers there. So again, you'll notice that partnership is a really key theme for us in how we've been able to do this work successfully. So to recruit the participants for the New Leaf project, we recruited from 22 shelters across Metro Vancouver. And we screened for some program eligibility. And the reason we kind of put these criteria in place was really because this was a very small beginning project. No one has ever done an unconditional cash transfer project with this population before. So really the idea was that we start with a really smaller subpopulation, and absolutely as we start to kind of think about how we want to expand this work, we are thinking about ways to expand the kind of parameters of what the criteria might be to enroll people. So for the pilot project, we looked at age, we looked at length of time homeless, and we looked at citizenship. And we also looked at functionality. And by functionality, we were looking at the severity of mental health, alcohol, and substance misuse. And this didn't mean that people couldn't have variations on those scales. We just needed to ensure that people weren't in the place of experiencing severe mental health issues or severe substance misuse. So eventually we recruited about 115 participants into the New Leaf project. We had an average age of 42 years old. We had a sort of male-female split. Quite significant % of participants had children, which has been really significant when we looked at the kind of the impact and the outcomes, and we see, you know, a lot of the sort of spillover effects into people spending the money on their children. We had 12% Indigenous peoples, which is actually quite low. We know that Indigenous peoples in Canada experience homelessness at a disproportionate rate, around, I think, 30%. So that is something that we are working on with our next project to just ensure that we are representing what is currently the homeless population in Canada. As I said before, ID was quite a significant barrier. So we found that about 24% of people didn't have ID when they joined the program. We also saw that 28% were actually working while living in shelters or accessing outreach services. And often that wasn't just one job, it was multiple jobs. So I'm just going to talk through a few of the kind of outcomes that we found from the pilot. So again, we were working with University of British Columbia, and we were sort of meeting up with participants about every 3 months to carry out surveys. We also did some sort of semi-structured qualitative interview as well. And we were measuring across a variety of different domains using sort of validated measures. And so some of the key domains where we were really seeing positive impacts: housing stability, spending, savings, food security, employment, and executive function. So in terms of housing stability, what we absolutely saw was that cash recipients were moving into stable housing much more quickly, especially in those immediate months after they got the cash transfer, than non-cash recipients. So this is really important in terms of thinking about cash transfers as a sort of preventative tool for homelessness. So we're actually just cutting that experience of homelessness short before people find themselves in a place where they're at an increased likelihood of becoming chronically homeless. This is really important given what we know about the sort of long-term impacts of homelessness. We know that people are in that place, they're at increased risk of trauma, mental health conditions, and also substance misuse. So we asked participants throughout the kind of evaluation how they were spending their money, and we asked them what they were spending. And with their consent, we also asked people to share their bank statements. And what we found really kind of challenges the assumptions that we have about impulsive spending, especially in populations experiencing homelessness. So against some of those misperceptions that an unconditional cash transfer will just be spent all at once, we actually found that people were spending it over an extended period of time. And we actually found that cash recipients retained 1,000 more in savings over 12 months than the non-cash group. So with the pilot, we were working with a very small population. And so we've just been able to start looking into kind of what some differences between demographics would look like. So we saw that women cash recipients saved more, and they spent more on their children than men did. We saw that BIPOC cash recipients saved more, increased their pay per hour, and executive function more than white cash recipients did. So as we expand this work, we absolutely want to be able to, as we sort of expand the sample size, actually be able to look into some of these differences between demographics as well, because I think it really helps with our understanding of cash transfers as a means to sort of push towards the economic and racial justice. So when we looked at the breakdown of spending, we were seeing that cash recipients were spending money on rent, food, clothing, transit, their children, and through more of the qualitative interviews and conversations, we were really seeing that, people were able to actually address their basic needs and beyond that sort of move into a place of stability so that they could start actually thinking about what their future might look like, and some of the things that they were just not in a place to think about when they were sort of in survival mode. And that was something that people talked about and described, like in survival mode, just thinking about, how am I going to get like the bus today to get to this place, to get this thing. So the cash transfer just helped kind of create a buffer there so that people could just have those things sorted and then move into the sort of more longer term thinking. We also saw a significant impact in food security, especially in like the early months. We saw that 65% of cash recipients achieved food security. Again, with the food security, we were seeing, mothers, parents were really spending a lot of money on food. People were able to suddenly make very different choices about the food that they were accessing, whereas when they were kind of living in the shelters, they really had limited choice in terms of have the shelter food, maybe get some fast food. Whereas when people were able to sort of move into a place of stability, suddenly they were able to cook. They could go and kind of buy and plan meals from supermarkets, which was something they weren't able to do before. So this is a really significant finding for us in terms of the kind of wider implications of this work to actually start shifting narratives. Some of those sort of misperceptions that we hold as a society, particularly about a group that is kind of generalized. So, you know, we talk about the homeless population as a kind of one homogenous group. What we found was that cash recipients actually reduced their spending on what we call temptation goods, so alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes, by nearly 40%. So this finding has been really powerful. It's been sort of the one that has created a lot of public conversation since we came out with our results. So we hope to just kind of find more on that as we expand the work so that we can kind of carry on pushing that conversation, that different conversation about the idea of giving unconditional cash transfers to this population. We also carried out a cost analysis on the cost of services, and we actually found that cash recipients were saving about 8,100 Canadian dollars over 12 months, just via kind of reduced reliance on shelter services, so moving out of the shelter system more quickly, freeing up beds. And so if you factor in the cost of the cash transfer, that was about $600 of savings per person per year. So this is, again, really important when we're trying to talk about cash transfers, because it actually shows the potential for them to be actually cheaper than the status quo, which we know is incredibly expensive. So I'm going to now pass over to my colleague Heather, who is going to talk about our next steps, and then actually pass over to one of our participants to finish off with a video.
Thanks, Alice. It's great to be here. I can see that there's a lot of themes coming across the first two projects, so happy to see there's some consistency. I just wanted to briefly share with you what our next steps are as we go forward, because the Foundation for Social Change really is about testing projects, testing new ideas, and actually moving our projects to policy. So our sample population, as Alice shared with you, is quite small for the pilot project. And we are planning for an additional project, both in Vancouver, here in Vancouver, and in Toronto for the expansion project, where we'll be looking at transferring probably 200 cash transfers and 250 controls in our groups. We've also been shortlisted for a transformation project, which is a $26 million research grant. And that will take place similarly like an expansion of the pilot project, and it'll take place across 3 cities, Vancouver, Toronto, and Halifax. And also we've had a lot of interest in expanding our partnerships within the United States. So we've been working with Denver, we've been working in New York City, but also we've been working in strong partnership with Washington, DC. So we're going to continue to provide support to those partnerships as we go forward. Just next slide, I just wanted to share with folks that everything that we've been doing has been shoulder to shoulder with people with lived experience. And as Alice had shared with you, our Aboriginal communities, particularly here in Canada, are way overrepresented of people that are homeless. And I think there's a lot of stigma centered around how they would use money, that they're unable to control their spending, all the myths and the mental models that I think is shared across subpopulations of color. And so we thought we would give Ray, we work with, who's our community coordinator and provides support to our lived experience panel. Just we wanted to bring him along just to share his experience of receiving cash with you today. So over to Ray.
the next week, everything was gone, right? Like my job, my house, my everything, my money, it was gone. The balance that that New Leaf has given me basically gave me that stepping stone, right? Because I mean, I was homeless. I had no real income. And when I did make the income, it was to survive. Well, my goals is to better myself into the more frontline work with the addiction and the alcoholism and the abuse. And I kind of want to give back where I've came from. I just got computer training, start Monday. So I'm advancing myself, you know. I might one day be that important person that has a powerful voice. I'm just right now, like I said, a seed can grow into an oak tree, right? And hopefully one day I can be there.
So I hope everyone heard that. I haven't tested the audio, but thank you so much.
Yeah, and we'll hand it over to Breezy Paul right now and the Abundant Birth Project. Breezy.
Hey, y'all. Actually, I'm going to be kicking us off. I'm Latrice Love Goodlet, and just a second to get us set up. All right. So we are thrilled and excited to be here, especially amongst such distinguished colleagues and programs that are centering equity and dignity and humanity. As I mentioned, I'm Latrice Love Goodlet, and I'm the Associate Director with Expecting Justice for the Abundant Birth Project. We'd like to let you know that we take our community approach to heart when it comes to this work, and we know firsthand that many hands make light work, which is an African proverb. So you're going to see that woven throughout our presentation today and also in our presentation style. We're all speaking to you today as working mamas, and so our littles might sprinkle some extra love via background noise or make many guest appearances. My youngest is still nursing, so every now and then he pops up. But we want to thank you in advance for helping to normalize seeing and experiencing parents, birthing folks, and mamas as whole people, able to bring our whole selves into this work. And I'd like to share the floor with my colleagues briefly just to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right in. Go ahead, Breezy.
Thank you so much, Latrice. And I appreciate you centering the babies, because one thing my bio failed to mention was that I'm a new mama of a 6-month-old. And go ahead, Deb, I'll pass it to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deb Karasek. I am an assistant professor at UCSF, and I am co-leading the research and evaluation. I'm very happy to share the floor with these amazing women today.
All right, thanks, team. So our project is based in San Francisco, so we'll be looking at some birth outcomes. We'll be talking about preterm birth in our program. Next slide. So preterm birth, why is it important? Preterm birth is birth that occurs prior to 37 weeks. And we know in pregnancy that every single week counts, with 40 weeks being ideal for development, bonding, attachment, and better birth outcomes. And so when a baby is born premature, several issues can occur. In addition, preterm birth is the leading cause of infant death. Babies who survive can face a plethora of complications, cognitive and respiratory challenges, poor school readiness, and a variety of challenges that can impact academic achievement and future earning potential, along with other medical and social changes or challenges that you can see clearly that the impacts can be long-term and felt for a lifetime. That's not to mention the heavy emotional toll or financial toll that the families can also face. And preterm birth can change the trajectory of an individual and the family for years, possibly generations. So due to those challenges, we often see a vicious cycle of preterm birth and its relationship to poverty, with Black mothers and birthing folks preterm rates around 47 to 50% higher than other birthing folks. And that's not experienced equally across racial groups. So looking at this slide here, we want to take a look at the numbers. This is specific to San Francisco. So even though Black and Pacific Islander folks make up the two smallest populations in San Francisco, they have the highest preterm birth rates, with Black preterm birth rates consistently around 13.8 to 14%, and PI preterm birth rates have decreased from 12.7% to 10.4%, but these communities are the outliers, they're the hardest hit. And we can see also that Black preterm birth in particular is almost double that of other folks. Next slide. Okay, there we go. So for this slide, it's an image that represents just some of the historical and current structural and interpersonal ways that racism and anti-Blackness can impact Black birthing folks. And that's from determining where folks can afford to live, how they care for themselves and their families. Will they face housing and food insecurity? Will they face environmental racism and pollution at higher rates? Will they have access to healthy food and water? Will there be barriers to economic and educational opportunities? Will they have the ability to accumulate and pass on generational wealth? And that's huge, along with the egregious impacts of mass incarceration and the cycle of police brutality and killings that plays out almost daily. We can see how these factors impact individuals' families and communities. And we understand that racism is a major health concern that affects people's overall well-being and safety. And we also know that maternal stress is one of the causes of preterm birth. Next slide. So this slide here, I want to call your attention to, yes, representation matters, but I want to share, so do the details. So here we have a Black birthing person, and the CDC has listed some factors of preterm birth that are shared. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that overall, their individual and behavioral decisions and choices, Black race is highlighted, but nowhere is racism listed here. And so this quote from Monica McLemore and Joya Perry really informs our work, that there's nothing inherent about Black skin that increases the risk except for the overexposure to racism. And that can be interpersonal, that can be internalized, and it can be structural. Next slide. So for our approach, definitely want to shout out and credit our colleagues, Dr. Zaya Malawa, Jenna Garday, and Solaire Spilling. They've coined this term, which impacts our research, which is racism as a root cause for the racial disparities, especially regarding birth outcomes. And that's the approach to our work and how we want you, or want to encourage you rather, to think about some of the interventions that are laid out for community. So the first is it long-term? Is it sustainable? Is it institutionalized for a long-term impact? The second is thinking about precision, and is it precisely impacted to serve and change the life of racially marginalized groups, or is it like a one-size-fits-all solution? The other things to consider are systems change. Does it focus on changing policies, systems, and environments as opposed to changing people? And then finally, reparations, which seeks to repair historical injustices by shifting resources, power, and opportunities to marginalized racial groups. Next slide. So my colleague Solaire Spelling shared with me when I first started this work, when we invest during pregnancy and postpartum period, we're investing in the future. We're investing in educational achievement, neighborhood stability, civic engagement, and actively taking correction actions to impact racial harms from the past. And so with that, I will pass to Deb to discuss some of the economic inclusions.
Thank you so much, Latrice. So I want to briefly describe how economic inequality in San Francisco leads to stress during pregnancy. I'm sure everyone here is aware that San Francisco is a very wealthy city. We think of it as the tech center of the state and likely the country, but it's also a very unequal place. In fact, the Brookings Institute just released a report that found that it has the second highest rate of Black unemployment in the country. So here you can see an extension of that, the dramatic income inequality by race and ethnicity. So the lines here are the family needs standards that are set up by the Insight Center that really say, what does a family need to live comfortably in this city? So you can see here that Black families' median income is below even the needs for a single adult in San Francisco, and really far below a family that might have 2 adults and 2 children. Pacific Islander families, which is the other group that we're focused on, are also far below the needs that a family might have in this city. So as Latrice mentioned, pregnancy is a critical period for health, but it's also a time of significant economic stress. So there's little work in this area, but one study found that there's about a 10% average decline in income during pregnancy. And this occurs because obviously families need to plan for a child. There's additional expenses of pregnancy itself and healthcare. And also people might have to change their employment situation during pregnancy because of health concerns. So for single mothers, this income change can be as much as 42%. But income really isn't the full story. We also need to consider wealth. We know that wealth plays a role in weathering income volatility. It reduces the day-to-day stress that could be associated with making ends meet. It enables survival from financial setbacks, and it really allows a person to invest in themselves and in their family in the way that they see fit. Yet we know, and I'm sure this is of no surprise to anyone here, that the racial wealth gap in this country is extremely wide. So this chart plots income and wealth for Black and white families in the United States. And you can see here that Black families who earn the median income around $54,000 a year have fewer wealth and assets than a white family that earns only $18,000 a year. So this combination of income volatility and pregnancy combined with low cash reserves as a consequence of the racial wealth gap means that many Black and Pacific Islander families are facing a lot of additional stress during pregnancy, this really critical time in development. So we think that cash transfers during this time may disrupt the financial stress caused by structural racism and have the potential to improve birth outcomes. So as you've heard today, we already have evidence that cash works, and we think that it can especially work during pregnancy, and that's a critical time to invest. So while the Abundant Birth Project is the first pregnancy income supplement in the United States, there's been a similar program in Manitoba, Canada, and they actually saw a 17% reduction in preterm birth among recipients. So this type of change, just to put it in perspective, is much greater than anything that we see from clinical or behavioral interventions around birth outcomes. So in the Abundant Birth Project, we're measuring the impact of ABP, as we call it, on stress, mental health, sense of control, and agency, as well as on things like housing and economic security. So we believe that the combined impacts of these pathways will have a dramatic impact on maternal and child health outcomes, including preterm birth. So now I'm going to turn it over to Breezy Powell, one of our incredible community researchers on the Abundant Birth Project, to further describe our program.
Thank you so much, Deb. All right. As mentioned before, cash is, again, so much more than money. We know that cash will allow moms to have control of destiny, dignity, belonging and connectedness, trust, hope, aspiration, and safety. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, okay, so I'm super, super excited to talk about the Abundant Birth Project, which I feel like is all of our baby. So basically the ABP project is a monthly stipend of $1,000, sorry about that, given a month to Black and Pacific Islander San Francisco women. And so the Abundant Birth Project will be given to 150 Black and Pacific Islander moms. And it's the first of its kind in the US. We're super, super excited because it was funded primarily through philanthropy, and we're also super excited because we launched next month, which is June. So next slide. All right, so me being a community researcher, me and three other community researchers got together and we engaged community, and community helped us create what this eligibility would look like. So who would be eligible for the Abundant Birth Project? And we decided that a mom under 6 months, a pregnant mom under 6 months, she would have to be Black and Pacific Islander, a San Francisco resident, and you would have to make less than $100,000, and that the research participation was optional. That was huge for us. We thought, like, we didn't want people to feel like they had to participate in the research just to get access to the funds. Next slide. All right, yeah, so again, as I mentioned before, we were thinking, like, how do we design a program that really centers community? And we did that by training myself, I'm one of the community researchers, for Black and Pacific Islander identified folks. And we were trained in qualitative and quantitative research, and we got to directly engage community. And after we engaged community, we got to reconvene community and host 2 design sprints. You can go to the next slide. And that's in the design sprints is where we designed what the eligibility looks like and what the entire program would look like. So this was something that was led by community and totally centered the voice of community and honored community. Here you can see there's my baby that I was talking about earlier, my baby Amazi and me, another community researcher, Anjanette Coates, another community researcher, Sabra Bell, and on our last community researcher, Miley. And you can go to the next slide. Again, so community-led research, we got to host the 2 design sprints where community was directly involved in designing the amount, the eligibility, the distribution, and any additional services if moms would be interested in. It was a really, really in-depth process. We did 21 in-depth interviews via Zoom. This was right when pandemic kicked off. And yeah, we truly, truly were able to capture the needs that the moms really wanted. So this is a project that is designed for community by community. And you can go to the next slide. I'm going to hand it back off to Latrice.
Thank you, Breezy. One of the gems of what we do is being able to involve communities so thoroughly in every aspect of the project. Deb, I'm going to ask you to just go ahead and click while I move through. So one of the things to think about in responsibility and accountability to community is to think about how our program could potentially impact benefits. So we've worked really hard to make sure that we could get waivers and obtain, working with other agencies to make sure that folks' benefits and way of living is not impacted drastically with a decrease by joining our program. Also, go ahead and hit enter again. There are legislative things that are up for review and for passing, hopefully. And so we just encourage you, if you'd like to learn more, hit the next slide, to reach out to us. We want to definitely acknowledge all of our sponsors, our team, and community researchers that make this work possible. Without it, we wouldn't be able to move the work forward. So we appreciate you. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat for a video we have on YouTube, but this is how you contact us. If you have questions and you want to learn more, we can push out information to you as it becomes available. So we thank you for the opportunity to share with you. That's it for us.
Terrific. Thank you so much. What great projects are happening, and such thoughtful approaches to how to provide them in a community-based, accessible, meaningful way, and a diversity in approaches at the same time. So we're moving now into the part of our session today where we're going to have a conversation between the presenters. So if you're a presenter, feel free to put on your screen your video and open up your unmute. And we're going to talk about, we have 3 questions, and those questions are centered around planning guaranteed income programs, evaluating guaranteed income programs, and public policy associated with guaranteed income programs. So I'm going to ask the first question, which is, what does an organization need to consider in planning for and getting started with a guaranteed income project? What are the opportunities and challenges? Does anyone want to kick this off?
I can add something, I think, from our experience here in Canada. And I think one of the major challenges as we went forward with our unconditional cash transfers was the mental models and the stigma and the mental models that the general public holds for our population, which was the homeless population, and very, very, very limited understanding about what someone who's homeless, what your abilities are and what you can go through, and that homelessness is just a situation, that it's not, and it could happen to anybody at any time because everybody's pretty close to the edge. So I think for us, one of the biggest challenges was trying to get over that stigma and then get buy-in, particularly because we're a charity, about what, answering the question, like, what are you doing? And why are you doing that? And I can't believe you're doing that. Why would you do that? And so it was hard for us to actually raise funds. And one of the biggest barriers for us currently right now is our government. So we have our provincial government. So our funding has basically been widely supported by, our corporate partners, our community partners. But to date, we've had very little buy-in from either the provincial or federal government. Here in BC, they've just done a huge research paper on a universal basic income, and the outcomes were that we're not going in that direction, but we will be looking at segmentation across the populations to be able to see if we can increase supplemental care to and supports to certain segments of our population. For example, people with disabilities and those kinds of things. So I think for us, the biggest problem is we need to shift the mental model. And secondly, we need to bring our government leaders on board. And I think, yeah, I think that's our biggest challenge today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I can maybe break this down a little bit. I know our experience in Santa Monica, we spent 2 years actually working on deciding who, how, when, and how much with our housing commission, really kind of refining how much money someone was going to get, when they were going to get it, how long they could get it for, what qualified someone, and then also negotiating at the government level and with Social Security and our county, and making sure that people didn't have to stuff money in their bed mattress in order to participate in the program, and also how to give the money. So we kind of work through, can we give it to a landlord? Does a landlord have to accept it? Can we give it directly to a participant? Do they get it as a check? Do they get it as a card? How does it work? I mean, there's a lot of logistical pieces. So maybe could anybody speak to any pieces of those that resonate for them?
Yeah, for us, that was one of the biggest considerations that we needed to be ready for, is how to actually deliver, what mechanism. And so we ended up building our own payments platform to give people the option. We didn't want to assume that prepaid card was the easiest, because 50% of our participants actually chose direct deposit, which was an unexpected learning. And I think that was one of the biggest lessons, is having a strong customer service function. So to think about who's going to be on the other line, what throughout the 2 years or throughout the length of the program, when a participant calls and asks not only about how to use a card, but about the program itself. And so for that reason, we felt it was really important for our own staff to be on that other line and for us to really understand the system quite well.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of systems, I do want to say one commonality that I'm hearing across all these programs is the personal one-on-one attention that each participant is receiving to be in the program and to participate, to enroll in the program, to continue staying enrolled in the program, to address issues in the program, that this seems like a theme and an element that is really critical to success.
Yeah, we haven't launched yet because it's June, but I would definitely say that, we want to overall just make sure that the messaging is that we trust you and we're available to support you in this process in the way that you need to be supported, right? So your voice is centered, your experience is centered, and your dignity is centered. Because sometimes you go through these systems, right, as someone who's done it myself, and there's so much stigma attached to it and so much negativity that creates barriers, right, that don't really need to be there.
And paperwork. There's a lot of paperwork expected, right? So people, when we were working in Santa Monica, people would come in with bags of paperwork to share their utility bills and their various, they had to share 3 months of their history, their financial history. We also faced a lot of our seniors were dealing with a lot of anxiety that had been associated with being so cash strapped for so long. And so some of them even struggled to come in to leave their apartments. What kind of experiences have you had in getting people to kind of show up initially? What challenges have you seen in that area early on as well?
So I think to kind of add to this conversation, I think a lot of us emphasized at the beginning, like how important it is to do cooperative planning with families to make sure that we're listening well. We have had tons and tons of people over this past year as like guaranteed income has cropped up around the country, like reach out to us and say, oh, can we talk to you about setting up our program? Can you tell us why you chose these things? And we would always say, like, we're not going to talk to anybody unless they've had conversations with community first. Because like I said in my presentation, like everything is so based around that, like even like our stipend amount, right? So in California, it's pretty easy to get waivers for something through the government for guaranteed income programs, right? So that like that income doesn't count towards your subsidized housing or other things like that. In Mississippi, that like we don't have the political landscape for that to be possible, right? So our stipend amount is a lot higher than a lot of other programs that were starting up around the same time as us. And a piece of that was because we knew there would be trade-off with folks' benefits, right? And having that conversation. A lot of people want to ask about like where did the 12 months come from? Again, like that was our families telling us that was the time frame they thought they needed for this to happen. And yeah, we did some like economic analysis with those things and tried to figure those out. But I think like first and foremost, like everything has to come back to families. And just thinking about those considerations, I think also making sure, one thing we always tell everyone too is like, you need to have your fundraising done before you start a program. And that's huge because if you don't, and then like folks get cut off in the middle of the program, like that's why there's not trust there, right? Like that's why this has happened, because this has happened to people over and over again. In our first month of our second cohort, one of our moms called right away and was like, hey, now that COVID's here, like when are you guys cutting us off? And we were like, we're not cutting you off, like, but her assumption was, oh, things got hard, systems are hard, this is going to end just like everything else has ended. So I think that's a huge piece to make sure that that's happening, and recognizing, like for us as a nonprofit, it's a lot, like, I don't want to say a lot easier because we have to raise all of our own money, but like we have that money and we get a lot of control over what we choose to do with that money. Whereas if you're running a program through a city, there's a lot more to think about with political implications and having to make choices in that way. So I think, knowing your context, knowing your people, that's the place where you have to start with any of this and building that trust.
And maybe just to add to something that Sarah said, I really do think that we are at an important moment when we should no longer have people showing up with bags of paperwork, right? There have been national nonprofit organizations that have delivered cash transfers to people who are ineligible for welfare programs, such as the Emergency Fund. Right there, you have a list of eligible people for future guaranteed income policy. And so one of the things that we did at the Compton Pledge is we partnered with those organizations to use those pre-verified lists of eligible people to automatically enroll them. So there's no application process. We are coming to you with the solution. We are not asking you to prove how poor you are, which I think is a part of what contributes to this continued stigma around and the indignity of this welfare system and the loopholes that it makes people jump through. And so part of the ethos of guaranteed income is that perspective, is that emphasis on human dignity and how we can think about that not only in terms of the policy itself, but the way that we implement it and what's required of participants.
So Lisa, just 2 seconds. I just wanted to move back to your original question around anxiety within the populations. We did clinical screens on all of our participants, and certainly there was no evidence of chronic mental illness or significant substance use. But what we did see was there was definitely high anxiety, there was depression, there was symptoms of PTSD. So definitely just the long journey of never knowing what's coming next, I think, starts that flight reaction in most of the participants that we serve across all the domains that we've been working on. But one of the things that we did is actually, we really value relationship, and I think relationship in any of the programs is really important. And we had interviewers where basically individuals that followed our clients through and our participants through and were available to them 24/7 to help them problem solve, to help them just listen, help them figure out how to get to the bank. And as we move forward in our expansion project, one of the key things that we want to start to measure more closely was what was the impact of that relationship? And when we hear back from our LEAP members, our lived experience panel, they say, Heather, the cash was great, but you know, there's so many other things that made a huge difference. And relationship was key, particularly because homelessness is so isolating and lonely.
Mhm. We had kind of the opposite experience with our seniors, which is that we had a case management nonprofit partnering with us our first year to offer case management and to do 3 assessments during the course of the year. And our seniors were like, I don't really need case management. I'm fine. I'm good. I've been doing this a long time. So that was kind of interesting. There were very few who actually, you know, just a handful out of our 26 participants who actually needed the case management. So it is interesting how each population is different and how each individual within a population is different in terms of what they think they need or they need to access and their understanding of systems.
So I'll just add to that is that, and I was going to share that with you before, is that we did not case manage. So there is case management processes here in Canada, but our interviewers were more like friends. They weren't like case managers. They were like peers and buddies, right? In some respects. So we wrapped that around them. I think that made a difference because they weren't part of a system.
Yeah, and not so isolated. Isolation is definitely something that I also see as a theme across these programs as well. So any other thoughts on planning? And I'm just going to mention some themes. Doing your benefits research, having community-led design, understanding systems both at an organizational level for the organization that's putting on the program, but also at an individual level for what systems individuals participating in the program need to navigate. Human dignity, understanding that human dignity needs to be a core value, and barriers to entry, understanding what are the barriers to entry into my program that I'm putting up or breaking down, and then also the value of relationships. Okay, so yes, was there, Deborah, you were going to add something?
Oh, I was just going to add that I think those are all really great points. And for us in San Francisco, you know, we've been 3 years into this planning process. And a really key factor for us was having local agencies that were really on board with the whole ethos of this program, and saw the gaps, particularly for Black and Pacific Islander families with existing social safety net programs within the city. And so having some of those foundational partners, for us, our Human Services Agency and our Office of Financial Empowerment, to really help guide this work and connect to some of the state level, you know, waivers and benefits work has been really key. So if you are in a place where that, you know, you have those relationships already with local government, which I understand might not be the case in all places, I think that can be a real benefit to moving the work forward.
Yeah, I think who here on the panel has a relationship with local government through their program? Pretty much everyone. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it seems like definitely another core piece that we're seeing across the programs. Okay, great. So the second question here is about evaluation. What does having an evaluation component add to your program? And moving forward, how do you see guaranteed income program evaluation evolving as we learn more and know more about the basics? How might evaluation change, or how have you even seen that evaluation change in your own program over time?
I think, you know, as I was saying in a bit of my presentation, we have empirical evidence from the 90s onwards on the impact of unconditional and conditional cash transfers. And so I think in terms of evaluation, you know, it's the idea that people spend money on temptation goods comes more from mass culture than it does from empirics. And so if we take as a given, as was said in the beginning of this session, that giving cash works, what we need to study is how to implement the policy, the timing of the transfers, the mechanism of the transfers. If a government has X amount of money, is it more effective to give it to lots of people or a higher transfer to a smaller group of people? And so I think those are unanswered policy questions that research can speak to. But when it comes to what do people spend the money on, to finally bust those racist stereotypes, narrative change is just as important as empirical research. It's quite rare that, an academic paper will really change mindsets as much as those human stories and that were so important that the video shared today really spoke to as well.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think those are all really good points. For us, our program is really clearly coming out of the public health, reproductive justice space. And so for us, it is really important to push forward the types of interventions that we think about when we think about health interventions, and particularly to improve birth equity. Traditionally funders, hospital systems, academics are really focused on things that are very close to the individual. And so we do continue to need this evidence that, hey, thinking outside the box, thinking upstream works. And in fact, it works better than, targeting at the clinic or at behavior. And so I think from a health perspective, we really do need to continue to measure these outcomes to push forward the evidence for this work. And then, that I think it's really important to start designing, which we already are, but research and evaluation that asks really targeted questions about equity, and having that at the center of all of our evaluation strategies.
Yeah, echoing everything that's been said already, even just in the 3 years of our program, like we've really shifted our strategy from starting with some of these more quantitative measures to, with this third cohort, focusing almost exclusively on qualitative data and focusing on stories and narrative change. Because like we said, cash works. We proved cash works. And right now, like what we really want to do is change a lot of those stories and stereotypes that are in people's heads, because that is so much of what guides public policy, right? Like even this morning, if anyone heard, there was a story on Morning Edition where they interviewed our CEO Aisha and talked to one of our moms, which was awesome, and they were sharing that story. But then, like in there, they played the stupid. Sorry, like my opinions out here, but they played that Ronald Reagan clip where he talks about creating this myth around the welfare queen, and like, it's still there. Like that is this crazy speech that he gave that has guided public policy, particularly around cash, for the last 30 years. And how do we take that out, and how do we replace that with the story of Tia, who was the mom who shared this morning? Like, how do we change that? And so that's really where our focus on evaluation is going, and where we really hope that it will go moving forward, especially as we have opportunities with some new public policies coming out now.
Can I add one more thing to what I said too? Just, I think what needs to be evaluated is something that we often push till later, how we pay for it and what it replaces. And it's almost like, with healthcare, we can all agree that doctors improve health. That's the stage that we're at with cash. We're all sort of trying to agree that cash improves poverty. But if we all agree on healthcare, where politics breaks down is it public healthcare? Is it private healthcare? Who pays for it? And that's, I think, the next step that we need to be forward-looking and really, bring into the conversation, because this alignment, I want us to move past it, exactly as Sarah was saying.
Yeah, it sounds like as a field, we're stuck where our critics are stuck in a way around still proving something that's been proven. So how do we all embrace that that's an assumption, that we've proven it and we've moved on, and we're not even going to talk about it anymore necessarily, unless we're using it as a way to refine our programs and refine the ways, the impact that our programs are making, and not necessarily sort of as this broad response to ongoing criticism about the tool itself, because this is an anti-poverty tool, right? So we're all looking at that. I also think, in addition to systemic racism, we're also looking at marginalized communities, and how I know so many of my seniors were isolated and alone and marginalized in our society as seniors, and really reflective of an overall societal disregard for people who are aging in place. And to what extent do your programs deal with marginalization and in the evaluation and planning?
Well, I would say for us, and thinking about the populations that we serve, is how that shows up, and also being intentional about the narrative that is created around who's deserving. And as Sarah shared, like there's some things that we just already know, and so public may be asking questions in a certain way, and our responsibility when it comes to accountability for our participants and for community is to make sure that we continue to highlight equity and liberation, right? And the joy that can come from folks having access, and having barriers removed to no strings attached supplements, right? To really just continue to shine the light on that. But I think in our work anyway, it's reflected by who we serve, and then going to community to find out what actually could be a solution to these, problems that you're facing, and just moving that work forward.
For us at the Compton Pledge, something that was really critical was to serve undocumented and formerly incarcerated residents who weren't eligible for other welfare programs. And for that, it's really difficult to reach because intentionally systems are designed to exclude their information. But as I was saying before, you do have community-based organizations who have that trusted network. So it's not only about getting people's information, email address, cell phone number, but really being able to have the relationship of trust which those organizations hold. So in that sense, our partnerships with CBOs nationally and locally was critical for serving the proportional amount of undocumented and incarcerated, which I think is another really missing part of this conversation.
Great. So, so we could add accessing trusted networks into our planning and maybe even evaluation. And I'm going to do a quick summary here and invite you to add. Let's take it as a given that cash transfers work when it comes to evaluation. The busting racial stereotypes and acknowledging how marginalization of certain sectors of our community have created economic disparity, pushing forward interventions that lead to equity, thinking upstream, adding targeted questions about equity in our evaluation, moving from quantitative to qualitative so that we're understanding the stories that we can utilize to develop public policy, evaluating how we're going to pay for guaranteed income and what it replaces, highlighting equity and liberation, and accessing community wisdom and evaluation as well. Any additions to that list around evaluations? Great. So we touched on public policy, that all these are woven together so closely. But I want to hear even more about what do you see as the key public policy issues for guaranteed income programs and the future of guaranteed income, whether it be in Canada or the United States or even internationally. I know Nika, you've worked in that space as well.
I think, as I was saying, how we're going to pay for it, right? So the only universal basic income programs that were at the national scale were Mongolia and Iran in 2011, and it was pegged to oil royalties. And we have a similar model in Alaska, the Alaska Permanent Dividend. But how can we create that? That's essentially taxes on oil companies, which says something about how we could pay for this through progressive taxes. And I think that's a public policy issue that relates to welfare. Welfare is a part of our overall economic system, which is incredibly unequal. And so unless we talk about where it comes from the top, how to serve the bottom, that's really, I think, a public policy worthy of exploration right now.
I know in Santa Monica, we actually utilized money from a tax that had been a sales tax, half-cent sales tax that had been levied, that the community had voted for both affordable housing and for schools. So it was a 1/4 cent sales tax that went to housing and a 1/4 cent that went to schools. So it had become a permanent source of funding and had a lot of flexibility. And also the Social Security Administration saw it not as a subsidy layering issue where some of their funds had been passed down through locally. They didn't want them to overlap with that
Right.
program.
Right. And value-added taxes can be regressive and progressive. And I think wealth taxes are probably a path forwards as well.
And welfare systems. So let's talk about welfare systems and challenges and changes that we think need to happen in welfare systems in order to accommodate a guaranteed income approach.
Yeah, I think, for us, in some ways, I feel like I keep saying the same thing again and again about narrative change, but I think that's so much of what we're thinking about when it comes to public policy right now, too. So, I mean, our program always started with thinking about public policy and particularly with a goal of changing federal policy. So, a lot of it came from looking at TANF and when we were talking to our moms and asking about TANF, so that's temporary assistance for needy families. Like less than, I think at that point, like less than 2% of like applications for TANF in Mississippi were actually being accepted. At this point, there are 270 individuals in the state of Mississippi receiving TANF, which is just like mind-blowingly small and insane. But and so it's really interesting to us that like this conversation around cash has like exploded so quickly, and a lot of people have gone on board very quickly when like still no one's really willing to talk about TANF. And I don't think a lot of people don't even know what TANF is or don't have a lot of knowledge around it. And so I think, again, it's kind of like, how do we change that story and change that perspective, right? Because that cultural narrative killed TANF, essentially, is what happened, so that it became a program where states could just be like, oh, we're just going to give all this money to a workforce fund, or just be very non-transparent about what we're doing with it, which is kind of our reality. And how do we shift that, right? I think we have so much opportunity right now with the American Rescue Plan, with the expanded child tax credit, that we're so excited to see. And if we can move that legislation from being, not just kind of an off-the-cuff thing in the middle of COVID, but to being something permanent or being something long-term where people are getting cash and are used to getting cash and are recognizing that in their own lives and recognizing that in the lives of others, it's going to be a lot harder to take that away. So I think our hope right now, again, is change that story, push forward the stories of our families, show how important and life-changing this can be, get that written into federal policy, ideally, at least, for the next 5 years or whatever that looks like, and see what we can do from there.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, I agree. It's a really exciting time, and maybe all of the challenge of like the individual protection of benefits could not even be an issue if we have the change at the federal level, which I think that would be the goal. One other thing that has come up a lot in our work with community is what we think of as like the donut hole between income eligibility for people who are not eligible for any benefits, but are still far below their needs to live in a place like the Bay Area. And in particular, when we think about the racial wealth gap and history of economic exclusion for Black families, like how can we uplift people who are not just at the lowest income, but still really need their needs met, and think about it as a step closer to reparations.
Mm-hmm. And also addressing displacement, right? So part of why people get displaced, I mean, in LA alone, we see people leave LA, they kind of move to San Gabriel, or they move to Riverside, or they move to San Bernardino, and then they're on the train 2 hours in each direction just so that they can have affordable housing and work a working class job. So also I could see guaranteed income as a way to address displacement, urban displacement, particularly around job centers, right? I also think that healthcare systems are something that come into play in addition to welfare systems. We found some really big challenges around Medi-Cal and Medicare. And, once someone becomes a senior, their eligibility for those programs is very, very tight financially. And universal basic health care, a universal basic income or guaranteed income can actually push them out of the range of even being eligible for health care, which is really scary, especially for seniors, if not anyone. So, I see that as a key public policy issue as well. If I'm to go back over the list of things that just came up, we have how to pay for it, welfare systems, healthcare systems, government transparency with where is the money the government has now, where is it going, how's it being used, and why can't it be, or how should it be directed toward guaranteed income programs, and some opportunities in the American Rescue Plan, the child care tax credit, and a theme here around federal level changes, a focus on federal policy as being key. Anything else that the panel would like to add?
I would like to, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Lisa, I just wanted to add that just reflecting on your seniors, with our homeless population, we were able to move our provincial government to not remove any of the benefits that they were getting either for disability or through welfare. But they were able to receive the direct cash payments as well as those, because our policy here was that if you were receiving cash, then you would not be receiving your other supplemental, additions. And so I think that was a good first step for us. And we just met with government this past week, and they said that they would keep that in place as we move forward for our expansion project. But one of the big challenges that we're experiencing here is that our governments, both at a provincial and a federal level, don't know where this fits in. So their feedback to us is, this is bold, this is new, this is great, but we have all this other stuff in place. And where does this kind of fit in with everything else that we have? So I think part of it is we have to kind of lead the way and actually demonstrate that the deconstruction, we need to deconstruct some of those other systems in order to release some funds to be able to put the emerging new system that we want to put in place. And that transfer, I think, is extremely risky here in Canada. And we're fortunate that there's going to be an election, federal election this year. So we're hoping to leverage a little bit of that in order to help to move this agenda forward on the agenda.
Thank you. Those are really a really great point around deconstructing old systems, just around not just deconstructing the stories, but then saying, well, the systems associated with the stories are built around the stories. They need to be broken down and started from from a fresh new perspective that's relevant to today.
And something that I'll add too was really in line with what you just said, is that when we look at the welfare system, we should also look at the touch points that individuals have with it, when they were built, and if it's easy to use. And so we have to invest in new government technologies to have that infrastructure that's more inclusive. And at the Fund for Guaranteed Income, if we could build a payments platform that's easy to use and an admin portal in 3 months and have a 90-second waiting time for 800 participants with a team of 3 people, and I'm the oldest and I'm 28, that says something about what we can and should expect of government moving forward.
That's a great point. I know several people who've experienced unemployment during COVID and have been on the phone up to 90 minutes waiting to discuss their unemployment issues. So these are challenges with our systems in terms of their actual customer service, right? So pressing on customer service and accessibility sounds like another aspect. Well, I think that is our time. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your contributions, for the amazing work that you do, for your deep thinking, and your personal connection to the work. And it's really great to see this, diversity of programs, but similarity in across the board in terms of approach, thinking, and optimism for the future of guaranteed income. So at this point, I'm going to hand over our presentation to Evelyn Blumenberg, and she is going to offer some closing remarks. So Evie, you're on next, and thank you everybody for your participation.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to do what all the other speakers did as well and share my screen and only have a few slides. So first, I also, like Lisa, want to sort of thank our terrific speakers this morning. It's definitely hard to follow such an excellent group of speakers and programs, so very, very inspiring. I wanted to end this great session by making a few closing sort of remarks about supporting low-income families during the COVID crisis and beyond. So the need moving forward, not, I guess, as we've all been talking about, sort of justifying these sort of programs themselves. So I want to say just a few words about low-income and non-white families who, as we've talked about already, have had trouble paying expenses, certainly before the COVID crisis, and things have escalated during the COVID crisis. And that, you know, during this crisis, many families have met their spending needs by relying on federal stimulus funds as well as other extended benefits. And then I want to kind of harken back to the Great Recession and, you know, and sort of underscore the point that particularly for non-white families, that this recovery is going to take sort of many years, which really underscores the importance of having sustained intervention such as guaranteed income. So I know some of you who are participants know me, so I'm a data person. So I'm going to present just a few numbers here. And as Maddie sort of mentioned at the very beginning in her introductory remarks, I direct the Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies, and the center does work on housing and transportation and economic policies in the larger LA region. So at least for the purposes of this very, very tiny short presentation, I'm going to kind of draw on data for sort of Los Angeles. So some of you might know already, the Census Bureau has been sort of doing this household pulse survey to get a sense of what's happening with individuals and families during the COVID crisis. And so this graph is about difficulty paying expenses during this particular crisis. And you could, certainly see, again, for Los Angeles, income on the left, race and ethnicity on the right. And so you can certainly see that lower income households are really struggling to sort of pay their household expenses, and particularly Hispanic and Black. I mean, everybody's struggling, but disproportionately Hispanic and Black families here in the Los Angeles metropolitan area. So how did individuals sort of make ends meet during this sort of crisis here in LA? So, you could see there's lots of ways. It adds up to greater than 100% because families are mixing and matching all kinds of ways in order to sort of meet their spending needs. But you can see all the way on the left that more than half of the individuals in the survey relied on the stimulus payment. So we were talking about the role of the federal government moving forward, and so this is certainly played out during this crisis. But also all the way on the right, we were talking about food security. So certainly some families were using SNAP benefits as well. So what happened with sort of poverty rates during this pandemic? So this is the different source of data, sort of data from the current population survey. It's where we get the unemployment rates from. And we can see just a couple of things. So one is, I think we've already talked about early on looking at racial disparities in income and income inequality, and you can certainly see that play out with poverty rates here. So that's one thing. These ongoing racial disparities. But the other thing among Black, Asian, and Hispanic households, their poverty rates went down in Los Angeles between sort of pre-pandemic 2019 and 2020. In large part, others have sort of talked about this as well, as in large part because of the federal stimulus and federal resources. But the point that I'm building up to is really on this graph. It's taking a much longer term sort of view when we sort of look at, in this case, poverty rates. The grade area in sort of late 2007, 2008, 2009 is the Great Recession. And of course, all the way on the right is this COVID recession. So again, you see sort of big sort of disparities as well. And sort of same graph, just circled this area. I think that the important point here is twofold. One is that you see these disparities increase, during or in the aftermath of the Great Recession, and that poverty rates among Hispanic and Black families increased many years, were continuing to increase many years after the Great Recession. So I, like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, am convinced that the simplest sort of approach will prove to be the most effective, that the solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now widely discussed sort of measure, the guaranteed income, as you all have been sort of talking about. And on the right is the same map that sort of Nika presented at the very beginning of this session about the growing sort of chorus of mayors who are on board in terms of guaranteed income programs. And at the bottom are the California mayors that are interested and engaged in these efforts as well. But I really want to uplift or highlight your work, because I think that the support of all the mayors around the country would not have been sort of possible without the sort of the groundwork that a number of organizations around the country and around the globe, that kind of groundwork. And so that, to me, what was sort of so impressive about the talks this morning. Like Lisa, and maybe they overlap with what Lisa said, I just want to highlight some of my takeaways, and I'm sure this is not all inclusive. And one of the benefits of being on Zoom is that I could put together the slide while I was listening to everybody sort of talk. But some of the takeaways that I thought were very important in sort of included the point that many of you made, that guaranteed income programs are not only about the cash itself, but also about investing in communities and families and individuals. And we talked about a number of different sort of population groups with respect to your programs, and changing the narrative about the poor, about low-income families, about the homeless. I think it was Nika who said, and I'm an academic, that academic papers will not change mindsets. And I think that's exactly right, that we really need to think about in a concerted way about how we can sort of change the narrative about the poor. And it's shocking that we're still sort of focused on that Ronald Reagan sort of era and the stereotypes about welfare participants in particular. A second point is about the widespread nature of the movement. We talked about the US and Canada this morning, but of course we saw that great slide thinking about these efforts internationally and globally. I think all of you talked about establishing programs with the participation and the trust of the community. And here I was just sort of developing a list of, I'm sure, once again, not all inclusive, but a list of the kinds of elements of these programs that you all talked about. So eligibility, length of time, size of benefits or stipend, how to go about distributing the funds, recruitment strategies, the additional sort of resources and programs that are associated with your efforts. Many of you talked about the importance of rigorous program evaluation, and that there are hopefully multiple components of that program sort of evaluation. So in terms of the type of research, whether that evaluation is community-led, quantitative data, looking at numbers, qualitative data, the role of randomized controlled sort of trials in the case of Compton and Vancouver. So all really important elements, I think. The pieces of the sort of evaluation, so a focus on the various program benefits, and you can see I was running out of space on this slide for all the things all the various components of the program that you're all evaluating and seeing very positive results. And so again, I'm sure I've missed things, but stable housing, food security, paying bills on time, the ability to accumulate sort of savings, the ability to pay for essential expenses, housing, food, clothing, health insurance, transportation, employment outcomes, support for children, thinking about money management, and the decline in the purchase of temptation sort of goods, birth outcomes. All of these really important measures of how effective your programs are. And then finally, I think it was really helpful to kind of think about, we're interested in the program benefits and that very long list of program sort of benefits, and really also important to think about how those program benefits stack up with respect to the program costs as well, and a focus on the reduced reliance on services. I guess is a program benefit, but a reduced cost as well. So again, sort of very, very, very inspiring, and I know that I certainly learned a lot. I want to again sort of thank our speakers. I feel bad that we're not in a room together so we could kind of hear the thunderous applause of participants. But I thought it was just a really terrific sort of lineup of lessons about your respective programs. I also want to thank Madeline Brosen, the Deputy Director of the Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies, for organizing this event. And thanks goes out to Whitney Willis and Claudia Bustamante for doing all the big and little things to make this event possible. The seed of this idea actually came from a Lewis Center advisory board meeting. So if there are members of the advisory board that are present, I want to thank you for sort of inspiring this event. And I very much look forward, hopefully, to seeing everyone, hopefully in person, at the next Lewis Center event. We look forward, hopefully, to being back on campus in the fall. And in the meantime, you can stay connected sort of with the Lewis Center, and that information is on this slide. So thanks, everyone, both speakers and participants.